Hey everyone, me Kevin here. Today I have a good news, bad news update. I'm also going to touch on mortgage forbearance, why to pull from a 401k, and some stock advice towards the end. Obviously, cases are spiking. We know that, and in respect for your time, I want to get right into the new information. The Federal Reserve Bank presidents, there are 12 of them together. They tend to determine collectively, along with the Board of Governors of the Fed, how much money gets printed, and these folks are very powerful mouthpieces for economic data. When they say something at the Fed, not only does the world listen, but the United States listens, Congress listens, we listen, and the stock market listens. This also means that Congress is going to pay specific attention to what the Fed says about the next rounds of stimulus. And so when the Fed changes their tune, it's really important to pay attention. And the Fed literally just changed their tune. Let me first start by saying this. We already know that the Federal Reserve is demanding more stimulus from Congress. We've heard Jerome Powell publicly support the $600 per week in unemployment pay. We've heard calls for more support for state and local governments, and we've heard them applaud direct stimulus payments. But we've also heard Jerome say, hey, publicly I can only say so much. I'm not a legislature. He's not in Congress, right? So, you really got to defer to Congress. When he said this, he really implied that privately he's beating up people in Congress going, yo, we need more stimulus. That's the old news, right? But the old news also includes that the Fed collectively thought unemployment would go down below 10% by the end of this year. And any kind of change from that would mean things are getting worse. So in kind of recap here, before I tell you the change, the Fed thought, okay, all right, as long as we keep going on this course, things are hopefully going to finally get better. And that's exactly what we saw at the end of May, at the beginning of June. Things were finally coming on the up and up, and we're all looking at this as, all right, we've got the V-shaped recovery coming. Well, Boston's Federal Reserve Bank president said that the recent increases in payroll employment, the good jobs numbers we've been seeing in May and June, could be, quote, offset by possible business closures and serious health outcomes later. Basically, the good news that we heard is about to get eradicated and is about to evaporate. He also said that the economic outcome in the second half of the year is likely to be less than what was hoped for at the beginning of the pandemic, that more fiscal and monetary support will be needed, and then this. He stated that I expect the unemployment rate to still be at double-digit levels by the end of the year. These are combined like three big shifts here in the stance of the Fed. They're shifting to a substantially more negative POV. Maybe this explains now why they're loosening guidelines for their Main Street lending program. They're pumping that through. Honestly, they might even consider doing a Main Street forgiveness program so that companies like Dave & Buster's and the Cheesecake Factory don't go bankrupt as this pandemic continues to rage on. He also said that his own pessimistic forecast doesn't incorporate the challenges of a second wave of the virus. In other words, even the Fed thought that this would be over in a few months, and now they're beginning to panic. And when the Fed begins to panic, we know that we have problems. Now remember, these are the people who advise Congress. Congress listens to them. So I just gave you the bad news. The good news is the Senate confirmed Jerome Powell, the guy with the money printer, J. Powell. And so when they listen to him say, hey, we need more $600 in unemployment. We need the $1,200 in stimulus checks. You know what? We need both of these things. They're very likely to incorporate some of his beliefs. Now, the Economic Policy Institute yesterday reported that they believe keeping the $600 plus up in unemployment would provide 5.1 million jobs next year. That's one of the larger estimates we've heard. This is despite the Congressional Budget Office believing that there's a risk of de-incentivizing people from working if we continue the $600 plus up. But the Fed also ran something very interesting today. They showed the value of the $600 plus up across the United States. Let me show you those pictures. This map here shows us the purchasing power, how far our money goes in different states throughout the United States. And as you can see, the darker areas here represent a purchasing power of about $506 to $575. This means a $600 boost doesn't go far in places like Washington, California, or some of these Northeast states and Florida. However, on the other hand, the purchasing power goes really, really far in states like Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama. We've got more purchasing power in these areas here in the Sun Belt or in the Midwest, like Ohio and South Dakota. But take a look at this map, which is also very interesting. The Federal Reserve released this, and they showed that credit card delinquency rates, the amount of people who are behind on their credit payments, are actually highest in these dark areas of the country. They're almost double some of the lighter colored states, which are more up north over here. I went a step further and I overlaid what the poverty rate is, or what it looks like in the United States. This is where darker areas have more poverty, and it seems like the more poverty there is in an area, the more likely you are to see those sort of credit card delinquencies if we go back over here. Kind of an interesting parallel, and I guess that makes sense. So what does all of this research mean and this change in position from the Fed? Well, I personally believe that this research and the new pushes from the Federal Reserve are basically sponsored by Congress. You've got Congress people going, hey, yo, economists, can you give us some data? Can you give us some insight? What are we supposed to do? And this is going to be the real information that, in my opinion, they use to determine, okay, yeah, let's push through this HEROES Act. Let's get the next round of stimulus checks going. These are the things to pay attention to. The data the economists put together are very, very valuable. And I personally see not only more checks and more unemployment, but also more EIDL money and more PPP money, which, by the way, the deadline to apply for the PPP is Tuesday, and that money for the EIDL program, that free $1,000 grant, is going to run out soon. I have no idea when. They don't set a deadline. All of a sudden, they just close the portal. So if you have not applied to that yet, go to covid19relief.sba.gov. And if that's too long to remember, go to metkevin.com/1000 and it'll link you over there. Now, also remember to get your life insurance in the link down below. It takes you as little as 5 minutes, and you can get 2 free stocks as well. If you sign up for Webull, deposit $100 and you get 2 free stocks, one for signing up and one for depositing $100. Now let's talk 401ks, forbearance, and stocks. I've been asked a lot, that is, if you should draw from your 401k, because the CARES Act has created some exemptions where you could basically withdraw up to $100,000 from your 401k as long as you repay it within 3 years. It's penalty free. The only reason that I personally have found that it makes financial sense for you to draw on your 401k, well, obviously, if you're getting buried in like credit card debt or something like that, that would be a very good return on your investment to pay off that credit card debt. Just don't go spending again and accruing that again. But my personal belief is that if you're going to draw on this, if you can use that money to buy real estate and get into a below market value property, that is one way to keep your wealth and grow your wealth in one swoop. Think about it. You got $100,000 in a 401k, you move that $100,000 into real estate, you still have that original $100,000. But if you can now buy a $300,000 house that's worth $400,000 or $450,000 with $30,000 worth of work, then that's extra wedge you created, and you've preserved your original wealth. I talk about that religiously in the course down below. Coupon extended, by the way, to July 4th because I was so behind on replying to your bundle emails. Thank you, by the way, for those of you who reached out. Now, on forbearance, I'm frequently hearing that the banks are still trying to rip you all off in getting forbearance and that you're not exactly sure what to do. What I would do right now is 2 things. One, I would wait until July 1st to see what kind of new rules they release. The banks are vicious. And the second thing to do is don't sign anything giving up your rights, at least definitely not until July 1st. If they say, hey, you know what, you don't have to make your payment, and they send you a letter in writing or whatever, and you're not agreeing to anything, okay, then maybe you can not make your payment and wait and see. But if they make you sign some kind of repayment plan, I would be very cautious at signing anything, at least until we get our July 1st rulings come out. Now, regarding the stock market, my expectation is that this week has the potential and no guarantees of being a bloodbath. Now, I'm not a day trader, so I'm not going to pull up charts from last week and sound educated as I described last week to you. I try to make educated guesses about how to invest my money going forward, and that's difficult because we don't have crystal balls. But what I can warn you of is that either way, I believe that this week has the potential of being very volatile. This is going to be really the first full week where we realize, okay, wow, cases have been substantially spiking, and now more and more things are shutting down throughout different parts of the country. It's not just the South. It's not just young people anymore. Cases are spiking everywhere. And so now you've got to remember where the stock market went at the beginning of the pandemic and where it's going now. Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, people fled the stock market. They left everything. and there were many deals to be had, like buying Tesla or Amazon or Apple below market value. Now it seems like the only stocks that are getting hammered are the travel retail stocks, which sucks if we bought those kind of in the pandemic thinking that they would V-shape recover, because now we're feeling that sort of W. And so my opinion is the only reason to sell something right now is if you're overweight on some of these high-risk stocks. More than 15% of your portfolio is in these ultra high-risk stocks, that like the restaurant, the retail, the travel stocks. You gotta be careful. Those are gonna do great when the vaccine comes out, but don't go crazy heavy on that. It's a gamble right now. Instead, I would focus more on stocks that still have value, but also do well during the pandemic. Stay tuned for another video on those that I'll be releasing either today or early tomorrow. Stay tuned, and thank you so much for watching, folks. We will see you soon. And as usual, always make sure to like, subscribe, share the video if you've enjoyed it. Check out those 2 free stocks, get your life insurance, and check out those programs linked down below. Thanks so much, and we'll see you.